Welcome to our Adapting Film Production During COVID-19. Our speakers today are Melissa and Sarah, whom you just heard from as I was kind of getting them to tell me what it's like where they are. And I really appreciate those of you who submitted some comments about what it's like where you are. That's great. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate everyone taking the time out of their schedule. And hopefully this is going to be a helpful and insightful event for you. Just to give you an idea of how it works. So with our webinars, the first 5 minutes or so are going to be sort of this housekeeping and introductions. We're going to take a couple of minutes just to give you some Celtics updates. We like to make our webinars about the topic at hand, not about Celtics itself. So we'll just give you a couple of quick updates, but more information on that will be followed up in follow-up emails that we'll be sending you. So I'll be talking about a couple of things. We'll send you some links for that afterwards. We have a couple of panel questions that we'll be asking Melissa and Sarah just from our perspective. And once we're done with that, we're going to go into community questions. So when you registered for this webinar, you did have an opportunity to submit a question at that time. We are going to be concentrating on those questions. We're actually doing a 1.5 hour webinar today, so we can get as many questions in as we can. But we always end up with more questions than we have time for. So while you will have the opportunity to ask questions during the webinar, we are going to give priority to those that were asked beforehand. And then we'll move into, if we have the time, some of the questions that come up during the webinar. And then we'll just do a final roundup and give you some closing remarks after that. So just to let you know, if you've heard me say, earlier I was talking about the chat and then I was talking about submitting questions. We like to say, if you're submitting something for everyone to read, just a general comment, something directed at ourselves here at Celtics or our panelists in terms of just like, hey, thanks so much for doing this, that kind of thing. We love those, by the way. Feel free to use the chat. If you're actually asking a question that you want the panelists to answer, you have the Q&A up at the top of your screen, and that's where you can submit a question. For some of you, it might be at the bottom of your screen, but there's a thing there that's marked Q&A. So you should be able to ask a question there, and we'll have someone here from the team that will respond to you, and then we will try to get it over to Melissa and Sarah if we have the time for that. All of the questions are going to be dealt with that you send in that method at the end. So if you do submit a question and you're not seeing it answered right away, just realize that we're going to go through our panel questions first, and then we'll go into those. So who we are, you can see myself speaking here. I'm Dara, and I'm our customer training lead. Co-hosting with me today is Nicole. So I will be leading the panel discussion. Nicole will be leading the community discussion. And if you've ever spoken with us on social media, you have most likely spoken with Nicole. She's our great social media communications guru here. On the rest of our panel here at Celtics, we don't have Chelsea's name there. We have Junior. Junior is going to be moderating the chat. Along with Chelsea Linfield, who's a new employee here at Celtics and is really getting her feet wet really quick with these webinars. She's been great help. And then we have Laura, who's going to be helping us in the Q&A. So if you're asking a question there, it's probably Laura that's going to be responding to you. And then, of course, the reason you're all here are panelists. So we have Melissa. Melissa's based in New York, and she is, you can read her bio there. I'm not going to read it all out to you. You all got to see it when you registered as well. But Melissa has been doing this for how long? I mean, not doing this, obviously this for just a year, but in terms of being in the industry, it's been quite a while now. Hey, Melissa?
Yeah, over a decade.
Yeah. So Melissa is our seasoned professional who's kind of seen it all, done it all in the industry, which tends to happen when people are in the industry. You work in a very variety of fields quite often. And then Sarah is a recent graduate who has, was really making a name for herself. If you have not been on her Instagram, go on her Instagram. I've been stalking her. It's really interesting. And she's just getting started in the film industry and right away goes into this brand new role that was created just this year. So that's going to be a really interesting experience to hear from as well. And we're really happy that we were able to have both of them join us today. Thank you both so much. Did you want to say anything about your own background here? No, we're good. Okay, we'll continue on.
Good, yeah.
So just in terms of Celtics updates, we did notice that a lot of the questions that came in were about budgets, obviously. This is a whole new expense field. This is a whole new field in general. So some of you are wondering about, how do we budget for this? How do we track these expenses? I did want to let you all know, and we will be following this up in email. If you are using the Celtics budgeting system, you do have the ability to customize that budget and add extra line items. So your typical Hollywood budget never had anything for COVID-19 expenses. Doesn't have a line item for those kind of health and safety expenses usually. So you do have the ability to add those, and we will show you that in a follow-up email. So if you're interested in that, you'll be able to see it there. We also wanted to let you know about some really interesting things that are coming out of Celtics in the next couple of weeks. So we have a cast and crew module. One of the things that we're really focusing on this year at Celtics in terms of development is asset management and being able to control your productions. And so currently all of our cast and crew and people assets go in the same catalog as all our thing and place assets. We are going to have a cast and crew module, which is going to help you track people and make it easier to track, communicating with them, their availability, things like that. So stay tuned for that. That's coming out really soon, probably in the next 2 weeks, would you say, Junior? Based on testing? Yeah.
Very, very soon.
And yeah. And then the other one that a lot of people are going to be excited about, I say Windows desktop client there, where I should have said Windows Screenplay app. But basically we have we're working towards a more unified model of being able to use apps in our website. And our first step in that is that we're releasing an app that you can use on a Windows computer. We often get requests because we do have our Mac script app and we don't have anything similar for Windows. So this is going to be similar to that, where you're going to be able to work on your scripts offline through the app on your Windows computer. So that's really exciting. And again, that is coming out very soon. And I know a lot of people are going to be really happy to see that. We always announce these updates in studio. So if you're in your studio in Celtics working away, you'll see it. They're also always announced on our blog as well. And some of these you're going to get an email from too, I believe, from our marketing team. So you will be aware when we release it, but just to let you know that they're coming. I also wanted to let everyone know that at the end of the day today, at the end of our webinar, we will be taking the names of everyone who attended and doing a giveaway that will be announced in the follow-up email. I'm not going to take the time to do a draw during the webinar itself. We don't want to take away time from the questions. Really great giveaway. We have these face masks, which are made by a company here in Canada called Indigenous Face Masks. They're located in Northern Canada. And for every face mask that is purchased from them, they give one to a Native reserve here in Canada. So we'll have doubled up winners here. We'll have winners from the webinar and winners out there in some Native reserves who are going to have access to some beautiful masks as well that celebrate their culture. So stay tuned to see who are the winners of those at the end of in your follow-up email at the end of the webinar. And after all that, we'll go ahead and get started. So just to get started here, as I said, we do have some panel questions that we were going to ask both Melissa and Sarah. And we alluded to this earlier, but I think, everyone in this past year has experienced some kind of change in their personal and or professional life due to COVID-19. Some of those have been really negative, some has been positive. But for you guys, you are now working in a job that didn't even exist before COVID. So would each of you be able to tell us just a little something about your life prior to this, what you were doing professionally or what you were concentrating on? I guess we'll start with Sarah.
Yeah, I'd be happy to go first. So as Dara said, I am a recent graduate. I graduated from Case Western Reserve University in May of 2020. So at this time last year, we were just starting to think, maybe we're not going to have an in-person graduation. Maybe senior festivities aren't going to happen. So there was a lot to deal with there. Friends were getting job offers rescinded. Hiring wasn't happening. There was a lot going on. But it was after graduation, I was at home in New Jersey, which is, very close to New York City. So I had that kind of connection there where it was the first year that I didn't have an internship or anything lined up. So I kind of decided to poke around on Facebook groups and see if there were, things I could apply for, or a couple day shoots where I could get my foot in the door in the film industry. And there were so many posts about COVID compliance and things like that I started doing all this research, and I started getting every certificate I could, taking modules and stuff online, trying to get into the industry. And then, I was able to get my foot in the door. So Melissa has years of experience with what it was like in the industry before the pandemic. My first exposure to the industry was in the pandemic. So I can guess, but I don't have experience of what it was like before. So that was really interesting to jump into in that way.
Head first. Yes. Yeah. Mixing our metaphors. That's great. Thanks, Sarah. And Melissa, as Sarah alluded to and I alluded to earlier, your experience is very different. So you were already in the industry. Can you tell us, what your life was like kind of prior to COVID, what you were working on professionally? And just give us that kind of background.
Yeah, for sure. So I was, I had another day job at the time. I had a short film that we made as a proof of concept that had just done a really successful film festival run. We were about to launch a crowdfunding as a beginner to launch into a feature film. It'd be the second feature that I was the producer on, independent. And we shut that all down once COVID hit. And then I kind of got into the COVID compliance officer sphere by just educating myself, because I felt like if I was going to be approaching investors to get financing for the feature, I needed to educate myself as to what would be necessary, the budget, all the things. So I kind of started getting those certifications as a means to get that education, which then turned into a job, which then, because the entire industry is about connections, the second AD at the TV show that I now work for was like, oh, I didn't know you were doing this. Great. Do you want a job? And so, interviewed and jumped in that way. So, yeah.
That's great. So, you both came at it differently, and it's really interesting. My next question was actually going to be how you prepare for this kind of job that didn't exist before. You both alluded to some training, but I guess mainly, how did what you had already done in your life help you prepare for moving into that role? Melissa, you mentioned that you started taking the courses to educate yourself, but was there other things from your background that you felt helped you kind of embrace this role?
Absolutely. So I don't think that, it's still such a new role. So I think that you are best served if you have an understanding, whether it's through experience or education, of kind of the overall how a film happens, because you have to be in everybody's face, or, in everybody's department to be able to give recommendations, understand you do need to be working that close together, but please try to limit it. You need to have that understanding. So all of the ways in which I had hired or worked with crew or done different crew positions myself had definitely prepared that understanding to be able to properly advise people.
That's great. And then Sarah, I guess your background was very different. So you didn't have that kind of background, really. You had some education. I think probably just having been a student would have helped with those training courses you had to take. But is there anything in your prior experience that you felt really helped you embrace this role and move into it easily?
Well, so there's a lot of different parts about being a COVID compliance officer. There's administrative stuff, there's technical stuff, there's working with producer and then checking people in. So on the first real production I was a COVID compliance officer for, I was probably the youngest person on set, and my co-COVID compliance officer was a retired doctor, and he'd been working on films before. So we had these two very different perspectives working together, creating health questionnaires, checking people in every day, checking out HVAC systems. I had to look up what HVAC meant when we were talking talking to each other, heating, ventilation, air conditioning,
Yeah.
those kinds of things. And that was really great. I learned a lot from him, and I hope he learned something from me, who knows? But I think we worked together really well. And yeah, I would just say it's a customer service role too. Like I was, constantly taking temperatures and making sure I was communicating with everyone. If there was a red flag raised on a health questionnaire, I would be the one to, find the person and have a chat. So it's a lot of different things, and you can bring a lot of strengths to the role.
Definitely sounds like for both of you, communication was a really important part of it. Melissa came with that kind of understanding of what people were struggling with already. Sarah, you felt like communication really helped you. So it's really great to hear that, despite the different way each of you approached this, that was a really important aspect of it for both of you.
I would say also, as Sarah was talking about too, is organization, right? Communication, but also being almost, what one of my friends described it as almost like a concierge service. Because you're always like, there's a balance of like, what do you need? What can I do for you? How can I help? What do you need? What do you need? What do you need? And you're always there at the same time as being able to organize testing dates and supplies and schedules. And then also, especially, there's a lot of emotions around it. So you're also really dealing with a lot of people who are stressed out or very worried, or, you kind of have to be able to hold space for all those people too, to work through everything that they're going through so that they be able to work effectively.
Definitely. That's some great insight there, Melissa. Thank you. So for both of you, I guess, and you guys can fight over who starts first with this one. What would you consider the single most important, and this is going to be hard, I know, because there is no single most important thing always, the single most important safety measure with COVID-19 on a film set? Sarah, you look like you want to go first, so we'll let you go first.
Okay. It's basic, right? I would say masks, but especially on a film set, if you're dealing with talent who, masks aren't written in the script, that makes it that much more important for crew members and production and literally everyone to wear a mask if they can, if they're not shooting right now or whenever. So yeah, masks are really important. When they can be worn, they should be.
Absolutely. And Melissa, would you agree with that, or do you have a different input there?
Yes. And I think, honestly, there's only 4 things really that you need, right? So masks, spacing, hand sanitizing, good hand hygiene, and regular testing. Right, you have those 4 things for a safe set. So really removing any one of those isn't great. And you don't need to, you can really do all 4 of those things to really make sure that everybody stays safe.
Right. That's great. Thank you. I knew there wouldn't be a single thing. It was a bit of a trick question, honestly. And I think all of us, anybody who's listened to their public health messaging has heard those same messages, right? It's masks, it's distance, it's keeping your hands clean. And then in public situations, of course, it's the testing and the answering of the questionnaires. So it's great that, our regular everyday life is very similar to a film set. It's the same safety precautions we're all already taking. So that's interesting. But there are other things, obviously, that are happening. Obviously, with the spacing, you're trying to keep crew sizes smaller, things like that. So how do you see this pandemic affecting future productions? Do you think the safety measures are just going to go away once we're all immunized? Will some of this stay in place? And from your own experience in the industry, are people talking about the next pandemic? Because I think we're all realizing that this is not going to be the last time we go through this, right? So how do you see this pandemic affecting the future of film production? And we'll go with Melissa this time, because we've been leading with Sarah every time.
Sure. Yeah, that's a really hard question that I think no one really knows. I think that there's people in both camps, and maybe, of feeling really comfortable by the extra safety measures and, feeling really comforted by regular testing. and those kinds of things. And then other people that are really over it and want to go back to the camaraderie that exists on set with when you can see other people's faces and you can give people hugs and, you know, those basic kind of very human things. So I would imagine there are going to be some safety measures kept, but already that's kind of folded into, we have an environmental health and safety department, right? So they're already on set when there are stunts or when there's anything that is kind of, you know, a little riskier. So I think it might be kind of folded into that. There might be not as large of a COVID department in the future. And then maybe they bring it back for whatever the next thing is. But yeah, I don't think there's too much planning for the future just because I'm not sure what you would be able to do to plan.
Right.
Wait for when it happens.
Yeah. At least we have this experience to inform the future if it happens again, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Sarah, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I agree with Melissa. I think COVID compliance might be absorbed into more of a health and safety department area. But I also think that even if masks aren't being enforced, you're going to have people who are going to want to wear them, as they should. You know, they can, and you know, it's better safe than sorry. But I think the first thing to go is going to be the social distancing. That's hard enough as it is on set. You know, trying to ensure that there are enough 6 foot long tables with one person sitting at each end for lunch. If you have a crew of like hundreds of people, it's so hard to like make sure that that is happening. So I think people are going to be so excited when you don't have to worry about that anymore. But I think individually people are going to have varying comfort levels, whether that's getting tested on their own at, you know, a CVS or bringing a mask to work.
That makes sense. And again, it kind of reflects everyday life out there. I think, you know, I've been thinking, even though I struggled with wearing a mask at first because I have some breathing issues, it kind of, you know, made me feel like I was suffocating a little. But now I'm thinking, you know, maybe I'll keep this up. Like maybe every time I go grocery shopping, I'll just wear a mask. But yeah, definitely the social interaction. I think we are all missing that, you know, just being close to people. It's so important to humanity. So I can definitely see that being the first thing that goes as well, for sure. And I know even here, like as we've moved between lockdown levels and things have lightened up a little and you're allowed to like meet with more people, people have just been so eager to get to those stages, right? That's the most important thing to people, just being able to spend time with other people and in their proximity. So I think, yeah, it's no different on a film set than it is out there in the everyday world kind of thing in terms of that. That's really interesting. You both raised this. I didn't mention this in my preamble, but you both mentioned, you know, that the size of your COVID compliance office might shrink or might be absorbed into. So how many people for each of you is working on set on COVID compliance? Just out of curiosity more than anything right now. Sarah, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can go first. So I've never worked on a TV show, so I'm excited to hear what Melissa has to say about that. But from working in the world of independent film and, you know, ultra low budget productions, the first COVID role that I had, it was me and the producer, but it was, you know, in the summer, there still weren't many concrete guidelines about how to go about this. And that was as a production assistant who was in charge of COVID, regular, you know, and taking behind the scenes photos. Please don't do that to any person. Please have someone dedicated to COVID compliance, because if you're getting breakfast and you're also expected to take temperatures when people check in, you're not going to be able to do those at the same time. So just please have someone dedicated to it. My second role, which was as a COVID compliance officer, it was just me and the health and safety supervisor who was doubling as a COVID compliance officer. But there were no more than 50 people on set each day. So it was pretty, you could handle it pretty well between the two of us. You know, but I would be working on my commutes to and from work with sending out health questionnaires and creating, you know, email lists from the call sheets that were going to be sent out the next day. So it's really good to have multiple people to help out when possible.
Definitely. And Melissa, how's your experience been? How big is the COVID team, I guess, in your production there?
So we have about, in our show, we have, and of course it fluctuates by day players and by how many background we have and everything like that, but we have about 300 people, 300 to 350 people. And so for that, there is a COVID supervisor who has a medical background. There are 3 managers, there's a secretary, and then there are 3 PAs.
Okay.
And so we take care of, scheduling, testing, having our presence on set for the 12 to 13, 14-hour days, temperature checks in mornings and afternoons, and then all the supplies and, those kinds of things. But I can see where we don't need to currently. We have anybody who is working unmasked or is around people who are working unmasked, which we have a limited crew for that. They test every single day. So once that requirement is no longer needed, I can see that we don't need the amount of people that we have, because we just won't have the testing burden.
Right. Yeah, that makes total sense. And I guess speaking from a burden perspective and just from a production perspective and production assistant perspective, just managing all of this, what do you think the biggest effect the safety measures has had generally in the film industry? So whether that's budget, whether that's things taking longer to film, whether that's on-set morale, what do you feel like the largest effect has been, the place where you've seen the biggest sort of impact from it? Melissa, did you?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, of course, budget. I mean, we're looking at 25 to 30% increase in budget, on most projects, if not more. And morale is hard. Like, I don't think that because we're not on the other side of it yet. So none of us really realize how much it's still taking its toll on us. But the biggest thing in the day-to-day stressor is that things can't change last minute like they used to. And that's especially hard with a network TV of like having someone come in the next day. Okay, but we have to find testing and make sure that they clear to work before they can do that. You can't just, switch somebody out real quick. You can't same day. Say like Scripty is not feeling good on that day, what do we do in that case? It becomes that kind of thing. Like, so we have limited people that are supposed to be on set, but that also is hard to negotiate for any last minute changes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sarah, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds about right with my experience. Having not been a producer and having to deal with budgeting for these things, I can't 100% say from that perspective. But I will tell you, the first shoot that I was on didn't have money to test people on set. So, it was kind of like, get tested on your own, send us a screenshot, and, there we go. But absolutely with last minute plans, like we've had people waiting outside on the second shoot I was on. We had people waiting outside till the lab could send the results to us and we could, clear them. So yeah, things can't shift and things take a little longer now.
Yeah. And for an industry that's always been kind of like, hey, we need to shift quick. That's got to be a huge change for everyone. And obviously that then affects morale too, right? Because everything about how you work has changed in a lot of ways. It's really interesting. Really appreciate that perspective. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Nicole now for some of our community questions. So Nicole's excited to jump in there, I'm sure. I'm going to go ahead and put myself on mute and take it away, Nicole.
Thank you, Dara. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Just wanted to start the Q&A session by saying thank you so much for submitting all of your thoughtful questions. We got over 200 pre-submitted questions, so we're going to try our best to hit on the most popular themes, the most popular questions, and hopefully we can get to some of the questions that have been asked in our Q&A during the webinar. So without further ado, we're going to start out with some questions about budget. Sarah and Melissa, I know that we had chatted about talking about typical pay rates or pay scales for somebody who is a COVID compliance officer. So I don't know who would like to go first, but let's go Sarah, since she started most of them.
Yeah, so I think Melissa could probably give a better answer to this, because I know for a fact I have not been paid the relative standard, considering what I've been working on are ultra low budget and indies. But I've been seeing a typical day rate is about 500 plus 50 for a kit, which typically includes touchless thermometer, signage, things like that. And depending on how big the production is, probably, things you can get reimbursed for, like the masks and wipes and things like that. But yeah, that's typically the day rate. But I've heard of people getting paid like 1,000 a day. It kind of depends on where your production budget is and where you are in the world. But that's my experience with it.
Yeah, that's pretty on par. I mean, I would say that, especially when you're when you're doing, anything that's independent, say if you're looking to pay somebody, or if you are a COVID compliance officer looking to have a job, I would say that CCOs should pretty much be on par with other department heads. So whatever the budget is, really, like, they are a department head, they should be with you from start to finish, so they can look at all your plans and, see if you have enough space, and see if what is all the supplies that you need, what might be missing in your budget and all those things. So they really should walk with you through the whole process and then be paid accordingly. But yeah, on budgets, if it's a commercial budget and they're working in the millions of dollars, then yeah, everybody should be paid a little bit more. You don't want to skip on safety.
Thank you so much. And I really love that we are talking about this, because I think it's really important to be transparent about pay scales and pay rates for different positions on set. So thank you so much for that. The second question about budget, and I know we kind of talked about this a little bit, but somebody, Sally, they were wondering, how do they budget for a COVID safety compliance officer? So I guess you answered that part of the question. But for PPE, for special PA, set cleaner, especially with a restricted budget, if you could offer any tips or tricks to Sally, I'm sure they would appreciate it.
I mean, I think that, so there's two things. I think that I definitely appreciate the desire to do everything as cheaply as possible, and to try and figure out how to do it even with a limited budget. Having said that, I think it's really important to keep in mind that the virus is still very strong. Stronger strains are coming out. So it is really the one thing that if you can maybe sacrifice other things, if you can have rewrite the script so there's fewer people, if you can have fewer crew members, if you can have fewer locations, find ways that you are able to spend the money that's necessary to keep people safe, because you can't get somebody's life back, but you can always postpone your project till you raise more money. And so we really want to be able to put people's humanity first. Having said that, maybe if you are sourcing all the stuff yourself, so you're buying all the things yourself and you're not asking for somebody else to do it. If you have a person that is dedicated to cleaning high touch surface areas, and so you don't have a cleaning crew to do that necessarily, a specialized cleaning set person, things like that. But or you can ask people to do their own testing and pay for that themselves rather than production doing it, and see if they're willing to do that, so that you can save money there. I'm sure Sarah has some more thoughts on that too.
Well, it segues perfectly, because I was about to say, getting testing done yourself at the local pharmacy, it's not going to cost any money, and things usually turn out okay. But again, you always have to be careful, because if you take 3 days in between when you get the test and then when you get the results, you could get exposure then. So it's important to be cognizant of being responsible after you get your test, trying to isolate as much as possible so nothing new can come up. and on-set tests are really expensive. I heard that it's like $35 per nasal swab. Is that correct, Melissa?
Oh, more, especially if you have a nurse administered nasal swab that's then going to a lab. So you're paying for the testing, the testing staff, you're paying for a courier, you're paying for the lab to process it. So it ends up being more like, $150 per test kind of thing.
Okay, so yeah, getting tested like on your own is definitely a way to save money.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest one.
For sure. And also another thing to keep in mind is that the pricing of all of this is different depending on where you're situated. But for all of the attendees that are currently living in the US, that's pretty much what you can expect. I guess whatever set you're on, whether you have a small set or a bigger one. But that's really great insight. Thank you so much to you both. What are some time-efficient protocols that can be used to maximize filming on set during COVID? So I guess we talked about paying for tests yourself, so that could minimize the time that it takes to administer testing when people get on set. But are there other time-efficient protocols that you might recommend?
Well, I would recommend really looking at the call sheet and trying to stagger call times as much as possible. So that way you don't have a huge line of people 6 feet apart, waiting to get tested, because that can waste a lot of time. And it's also not the safest. So really being critical of who needs to be on set when, that can help in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, staggering people's arrival time. I think, just planning more. You just make sure that all of your pre-production work is really on point and you know exactly what you need to get and when you need to get it, so that, you're almost editing in mind while you're shooting, so that you don't spend any more time that you have to, but that's all in your pre-pro work.
That's great. Thank you so much. I hope that is useful to the person who asked that question. I'm finding it extremely insightful, so thank you so much. We're going to move on to another topic. We're going to talk about some general duties of a COVID compliance officer. So this question is from David H. And they ask, what are the standards being used on set as far as PPE for talent and crew, social distancing and sanitizing equipment? I know we talked about some of the general stuff. Testing as a prereq would probably be out of range of most freelance and student productions. But like we talked about, that is kind of important. So yeah, are there any other standards that you could talk to David about?
I mean, I guess I would say that the testing is kind of a non-negotiable. There's no reason to not get tested, and you don't want your film set to be the reason for a super spreader event. Don't do it. Don't take the chance. It's not worth it. Especially when you can go somewhere, there's a lot of free testing, you wait longer to do it, but you do want to at least have that. It's also not a fail safe. I think we'll be talking about that a little bit later, but so it's having a lot of hand sanitizer around, it's making sure people stay 6 feet apart. And another good thing is always having good ventilation, right? So you don't find ways to have either shooting outside or ways that you can keep windows open or have fans or have, air filters. Those can get very expensive. But if someone has them, that's always very, very useful. Sarah, can you think of more things? I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, definitely keeping windows open when possible and shooting outside when possible. If any screenwriters want to, think about altering your script in a way that would have outside scenes, because just, if it's not in an enclosed space, it's going to be safer, regardless, and more space for social distancing. Yeah, and if you're shooting in an old building or a building that has a lot of dust, or anything like that, working with the location manager or someone to just see how you can make it as safe as possible is something to think about, because that was not the first thing that came into my mind when I signed on to being a COVID compliance officer, but it is something you got to think about.
Yeah, and I would say that's really the importance. Like all of these things, there were things probably that Sarah and I could keep being like, oh yeah, and this, and this, and this, right? Just because we've been doing it and are kind of enmeshed in it. But that's why it's so important to have a CCO on your crew to be that person to guide you through it from beginning to end, so that they can make sure to go on the location scout with you and take a look and be like, this might be a problem, or can we do this? How about this other thing, right? So you really want that partner with you.
Absolutely. I think that's such an insightful thing to keep in mind for anybody who's about to enter a production or pre-production. Just having that one person that is the thing that's on their mind. Definitely, I can see that being so useful and integral to keep everybody safe. And it's actually really interesting that you mentioned shooting outside and the amount of cast or characters that you write into your script, and being mindful of that as a screenwriter, because those questions were also asked in some of the pre-submitted questions. So you kind of answered like 3 questions with that one answer, which is awesome. So thank you. So we're going to move right along to another topic, some rights and responses to rules. So the first question in this topic, Sarah asks, how are infractions handled? So I guess infractions to rules on set. And they also say, I know we heard Tom Cruise screaming at crew members, threatening to fire them, but there has to be a better way. So Melissa, I don't know if you want to start that one.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. I mean, there's all different types, right? There's the people who truly forget to have a mask, or it's like it comes down because you're talking and whatever, and people need gentle reminders, and that's, totally okay. When people, want to be obnoxious about it or don't want to follow the rules, I think I'm in a much easier position in that way, and that we're in a long running show. And therefore, if they don't follow the rules, it's very clear then they don't work. And especially after being out of work for 6 to 9 months, like most people were here in New York, everybody wants to work and they don't want to lose any more money. So that's a good motivator for everybody to just be like, I don't really care about your personal opinions about it or your feelings. You just have to follow the rules, and that's all it is. And if they don't want that, then it moves up the chain to their supervisor, and then it moves up to the UPM and the producer. And then, if it gets to that point and they still don't want to, then they get fired. It doesn't have to be nasty. It's just like you follow the rules or you don't. But I think it's a little bit harder, and probably Sarah can speak more to this, being in independent productions where they're only there for a little bit of time. I think it's a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. I was very fortunate. The cast and crews that I worked with were all very happy to comply, because we're all there for a reason. We want to make a movie. We want to do whatever it is, and we're going to do whatever we need to do to get it done. And I think that was most people's mindset. But of course, there are going to be times where, you take your mask down to take a drink of water. Maybe you forget that it's down, or maybe you're standing a little close to someone that's obviously not 6 feet. So it is good to have someone there who is looking at the whole, space with COVID in mind, and being there to send gentle reminders and just say, hey, 6 feet, please, or whatever. But yeah, I mean, people need reminders to stay hydrated too, because when you have a mask on, it's not as easy to drink a drink of water, but that's so important. So just being there to do the best we can, keep everyone safe in every way possible. Because remember that you're not there to be the nasty dictator to enforce everything and have your way. It's there so we're all gonna stay safe. We have the biggest possibility to get this movie done safely.
Thank you. That's really great insight. I think you nailed it on the head there, where there's a definite line between screaming and just trying to keep everybody safe. And, there's respectable ways to do that. And maybe there's other ways that aren't that. So it's good to keep that in mind, especially if you're responsible for sending out those reminders and talking to your crew. And yeah, it's been a difficult year. So also being understanding of that and kind and compassionate. That's so great. Thank you so much. So there's another question from Krista. They ask if they have daily testing and are kept in isolation, I guess during the production that they're a part of. Do you believe that crew, like masks for crew on set, are still required? So you might both have different outlooks on this, being like on a network show and doing independent work. So looking forward to your thoughts.
Yeah, I kind of suspect we have the same answer to it, but I'd say no, because of the incubation period of the virus. It takes 2 to 5 days for it to show up on a test. So if you get a negative test, it doesn't mean that you don't have the virus or aren't a carrier, can't pass it on. Now, if you wanted to work in a situation where nobody had to wear masks and you're all okay, that would require, I think, a minimum of a 2-week quarantine of everybody quarantining together and seeing nobody else. And then you would be able to do that. But I think that's the only safe way to do it. You can't rule it out by one test alone.
I agree with that 100%. And even if you were quarantining together for a long time and you were willing to spend all that production money on a hotel or a house or, whatever it is, number one, that is super expensive. So I've not worked on a production that has done that. I know there are some productions that are doing it, and they're kind of, the role model. But yeah, even if cast and crew were isolated, there's really no guarantee that someone didn't sneak out or that a food delivery person didn't come inside and, set stuff up. So it's really just better to be safe than sorry with wearing masks, especially because you don't know, and nothing is guaranteed. So I would recommend to wear your mask.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. In my own personal life, I feel even if someone told me it wasn't okay to wear my mask or that it was okay to not wear it, I would still feel like I had to, mostly because I know that that's like a fail safe or one of like the main ways that we can keep everyone around us safe. It's not even about you. It's kind of about everybody else. For me anyways, I would never want to get somebody else sick, but that's really great insight. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to another question. This one is from Andres, and they ask, how is this pandemic a precedent to have smaller crews in the future, even if the pandemic stops? And then they go on to say probably some studios won't go back to having large crews again because they realize people can still work just as well as before the pandemic.
Yeah, one of the reasons I guess I wanted to answer this question is just because the premise I feel like is incorrect, that studios and networks haven't reduced their crew sizes. It's all the same. It just, the way that we limit the number of people that are on set, like on the actual filming set, while people have their masks off, is that there are zones associated. And basically it's only essential crew that is around, and they'll have an extra face shield as well when people have to take their masks off. But other than that, and then everybody else gets kicked off, right? So you have a smaller crew actually on the filming set, but that doesn't mean that everybody else isn't still working, right, on location or on the stages or something just outside of the filming set. So I think it's still the same number of crew. They haven't reduced sizes. They just pay a lot more for everybody's safety, essentially.
On the flip side, when productions don't have enough money to pay everyone to keep everyone safe, I don't know if I would say that productions work as smoothly with fewer people, but if you're trying to keep everyone safe and you don't have enough money to pay an extra production assistant, you might pile more responsibilities and like divvy it up. And I don't know, I guess that's kind of on the producer of whatever low budget or film that you're doing, because that's gonna kind of depend on like if it works for you. I don't know if you've never made a film before and you're trying to do everything as safely as possible, you might not know the luxury of having a few extra hands on set. So that might just depend on your experience as a filmmaker and if you're interested / able to hire other people, if that made sense.
Yeah, I think that for sure makes sense. And it's also a matter of, like, especially for independent, when you're trying to give people double duty on a lot of jobs, it's putting a lot of stress on people. People are really worn down, and we can't keep doing that for forever. People can't work well in that way. And if you're someone that continues to do that after, or a producer that continues to do that after there's no need for it, people aren't going to want to work for you. They'll go for other jobs, especially as everything all opens up. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see. Yeah, I wasn't expecting you both to have different answers to that question, but maybe I should have, because your backgrounds are so different. And I guess it really does depend on what kind of production you're working on and what the budget is. And but I'm really glad that you flagged that question to answer, because I feel like that insight will be really useful to Andres. In thinking about, like, there are many different kinds of productions. So the ways in thinking about it might be different depending. So we're going to move on to some post-pandemic questions. So June wrote in and they asked, have the COVID protection protocols changed with vaccines? So I don't know where you're both in different states, the state of vaccination might be a little bit different. And they go on to ask, what about new rapid testing for the virus? So not antibodies. And are the SAG COVID protocols changing in the light of these developments? So I feel like your experiences might be different, your answers might be different, but Melissa, if you want to start.
Sure. And I think they meant the SAG protocol. So that's the Screen Actors Guild in the US.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's totally fine. So I think, sorry, true New York is honking outside. There's been a lot of questions about this, about, after having the vaccine, any protocol changes. We have not changed any protocols for it, mainly because for most people, they're taking 2 doses, right? And so there's that in between. So much honking. I hope you guys can hear that a lot. And then even after you get your second dose, there's still 2 weeks before you're fully vaccinated. And even then, you don't know if it has taken for everybody. Also, within all of that month to 6 weeks of time, you can still contract COVID and pass it on to other people. Or you could be a carrier of the virus even after you're vaccinated to other people. So with all of that, there is no change in protocol for temperature checks, mask wearing, social distancing, testing. We've been doing rapid testing the whole time with CVS Pharmacy. They have a whole rapid test thing that we do on set for all of those that are that essential crew and cast. But we haven't really changed the protocol with any of that either, as in terms of vaccines.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's no guarantee that everyone is going to get a vaccine, at least for now. I don't know. It's going to vary based on production or, company, whether or not you need to have a vaccination card to work on set. I think that's something that could happen soon. But as of right now, there are, still no guarantees. And like Melissa said, it still takes a long time. So there's just so many unknowns that protocol should not be changed and is not changed, in my opinion. It shouldn't be.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. I can totally understand that as being a thing. And yeah, we actually got a question during the webinar itself, which really follows from the question I just asked. So I'm just going to ask it now. Cody wrote in and asked, do you anticipate that the industry will go the way of, you have to be vaccinated in order to work? Or do you feel that we'll just continue with COVID protocols until it's safe enough to lessen those protocols?
I think that's going to be dependent on the unions. I think the unions really run the industry and set the standard for what they are going to let their union members work under. I think that's really tough in terms of just having, your personal rights, and to say that you can't work without a vaccine. I don't know. I think that those are really tricky questions. I'm glad I don't have to decide. But I don't think we're close to that yet. I think, in the US, we're maybe still around 15% of the population vaccinated. In New York, it's still like 24% on the first dose, or, at least getting their first dose, if not even fully vaccinated. So I think we're still a ways off.
That's a great point. If you're working non-union, I don't know how much controlled production would say that you have to have a vaccine, because I think a lot of people would not work then if that was true. So I just think that's not a risk production is willing to take if they're working without the union involved.
Thank you so much for answering, Cody. I hope that helps answer your question. I think that's, again, I would not want to be the one to have to make those decisions because they're extremely complex. I feel there's like a lot to consider there. But I guess we'll see eventually. So I'm going to hop right into some of the questions that have been submitted into the Q&A during our webinar. So I'm just going to, hop right in here. Next question up. How have your productions handled the most vulnerable parts of the set COVID-wise? They specifically mentioned hair and makeup, scenes with actors in close proximity. Some of these challenges must make the workflow of production feel impossible. Sarah, I don't know if you want to start, or me, Lisa.
Sure. So for hair and makeup, they have, yes, their masks, but they also have the face shields. And that's kind of, I would say, industry standard now, because you are being so close to someone who doesn't have a mask. And then if the makeup is like really intricate, then it's very possible that the talent wouldn't be able to wear masks walking from hair and makeup to set. And then in between takes, maybe not. But then maybe you have someone else who has just very natural makeup that can get touched up very easily. They'll put their mask on in between takes. So yeah, it kind of does throw a little twist into everything, and being critical of who needs to be doing what and how important it is, and what everyone needs to do to keep each other safe. But like, you might have a designated production assistant in charge of holding on to masks and then giving them back out when needed, depending on how big of a production budget you have. If you want a PA for that, it's possible. So yeah, I think just pre-production planning and seeing who needs to have what and what scenes require certain makeup, that's going to help save time at the end of the day.
Yeah, and in those times where they do need to be without masks, making sure that everybody else has a face shield on, like you mentioned, or has like a lot of space is given to them, that other people aren't crowded around. For scenes, where actors have, either have to be in close proximity or kissing, or I think that's where constant testing comes into play, which makes people feel a lot better. And that's a lot of trust on whoever that scene partner is, that they're also taking the precautions. And and I would imagine it would be helpful to have those conversations with your actors to make sure you know what their comfort levels are. Intimacy coordinators are really great to include into the conversation with this too, because they can really help guide consent and what people's boundaries are and what they're comfortable with, especially with something that can be, as scary as dealing with COVID. They're really great at shaping the conversation that way.
Great, thank you so much. Yes. All of that I think is important. Anytime you need to get close to anyone, I think we have to be thinking about all those things. Next question is from Neil. They have a USA specific question. They ask, have we seen productions shift to states that are open, like Georgia? I guess that's not always true. I guess it depends on the size of your production, like a lot of things, but Melissa, I know that you're in New York and you haven't stopped or slowed down, really changed styles and added a bunch of things. But I guess, have you seen production shift to states that are more open?
I would say I'm not really sure, honestly, for this. I've just been a little bit myopic in my own show, and our state. Sarah moves states, so she might have a better idea of like what the landscape is.
Well, I know for a while, a few years ago, Cleveland has been the location of filming for a lot of different movies like Judas and the Black Messiah, Cherry, and then this past year, nothing came to town. There's been like Cleveland film production happening, but nothing from LA or anything. But there is a movie coming this fall. So they're starting to plan for that. So that's exciting that things are starting to look up with, all the travel restrictions. And despite that, people are still choosing to come here. So hopefully that's a good sign. But yeah, I would imagine productions aren't traveling as much, although I did hear of, productions starting to produce in Canada and also in Atlanta. I know there's a bit more stuff going on down there. So I think it's really interesting to see what shift that's going to have in, centers of production moving forward.
Yeah, and actually in the chat, Kareem is saying that there's a lot of productions in Georgia since October. And I think that those are all pretty much a lot of local productions or people that were already going to be testing there. Even in states, like whether they're open or not, is kind of, if you're coming to a state to film, you're bringing a lot of money. And they're going to, especially when you're bringing all that money to do testing and have all the PPE and have all the protocols in place, you're actually very safe on a production, maybe safer than you are in general population. So whether a state is open or not, I think has less to do with how many protections you can put in place for the people that are going to be there, and for the people in the surrounding areas. And again, most of the protocols, especially on bigger productions that can afford to go to a different state to do a film, are union and therefore, subject to the return to work agreement that was done by all the unions and IATSE and SAG and everything else.
Great, thank you so much. That's a whole lot of information. So Noel, I hope that helps. So the next question is direct for Melissa, actually. And this might be too long of a question to answer on this webinar, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Chandra asks, can you explain what the COVID team is doing daily? So I don't know if they're asking for like a daily rundown through like what a day in your life looks like. How do you start your day? What are some tasks that you do throughout the day? Whatever you'd like to share, I'm sure Chandra would find useful.
Yeah, for sure. For us, it's, it's a lot of moving parts. So we there before anybody else is, and this is the same for us or for independent sets. We're the first people there, so we can get everybody temperature checked and get them cleared to come in. So if that means people start work at 5:45, we're there at 5:15 a.m. to be able to set up and get that done. And then we're there till the last person leaves. So we're there for the whole time. In our days, we'll be doing rounds, checking on people, checking in trailers, making sure people are following all the protocols, both on set and on the stage at large or just on location. We have testing every day. And so that includes the PCR testing. And so that generally is 4 to 6 or 7 hours a day. And so there's someone that's running that testing, checking people off, making sure that people, we already talked about how expensive it is per test. So the people who are going to get tested are the ones that are approved to be tested. Then there's all the work that a lot of my day is spent on is figuring out what's the manpower for every department. When are they working? What are their schedules? Who is about to fall out of rotation? Who are new day players that are coming in? Who's new cast and background and stunts that are coming in, and when? And so scheduling out, they have to all test within 48 hours prior to working. Everybody has to have a minimum of once a week. Are they working as essential crew or not? So where are they testing? So all of that. And then it's just answering general questions. We have both scrubbers and air filters. Scrubbers are massive. They're for big warehouse spaces because we have stage spaces. And so it's moving those around because even as much money as network has, we only bought so many. So we have moved them around to all the spaces so that they're set up for the next scenes. Yeah, all of those things.
That is a whole whack of responsibility. Sarah, did you have anything to add? Is there anything that Melissa maybe didn't mention that you do in like an independent production kind of realm?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned before, I've dealt with a lot smaller COVID compliance teams. So I was checking people in when they come to set, but when the testers arrived, I would also be talking to them and communicating with them. And my co-COVID compliance officer was making the testing schedule and, working from the call sheet. So we kind of worked together on that aspect of things. And then I kind of manned the front door, I guess because it was a low budget. I doubled the security, which not a good idea. Luckily, nothing bad happened. But, we were shooting on a busy street. So the locals would, stop by. They'd be like, oh, is something filming in here? Or, oh, what is this? I'd have to make sure they didn't come past this, the door basically, because we don't know if they have COVID. They haven't been tested. They're not in our sheet. So, we had to very graciously say, please go away. So unfortunately, closed sets are even more important at this time. And that's something to remember as well. So yeah, I did a lot of the customer service sort of stuff in my role, which I enjoy. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that additional insight. Yeah, I can't imagine having all of these things in my mind at once to like make sure that I'm doing or not doing or saying or not saying. But kudos, it's definitely a really important job. And thank you so much for giving us a little bit of a snapshot into your day-to-day life. I do have another follow-up question that is kind of in the same vein. Eduardo asked, did the pandemic change, either increase or decrease the usual working hours on set? I know that anybody who works in production works extremely long hours, but I can imagine that it does add a little bit of extra time because there's a little bit of extra prepping, cleaning, washing, that kind of thing to do. So Sarah, if you want to take a stab at this one.
Yeah, I mean, days are long. That hasn't changed. I think it is good, though, that the unions are not putting pressure, but really putting recommendations to keep days as short as possible to let people get as much sleep as they can, because that is such an important part in, fighting any potential illness, is making sure that you're getting enough sleep. So I think there is a little more mindfulness in terms of personal self-care, and making sure that you're safe. So sleeping, getting hydrated, not overworking yourself, but also when you're not able to hire as many people and you're taking on those responsibilities, how is taking care of yourself going to play out with doing more things and possibly taking longer times on set? So that's just a lot to think about. Could you remind me of the question?
Of course. They asked, did the pandemic change the usual working hours? So do you feel like they've increased or decreased?
Well, like I said before, this was my first time really in the industry. So 12-hour day is a 12-hour day to me. So.
That's fair. Lisa, maybe you have something to add there.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, like 12 hours is where they try to keep it for everybody now. And that wasn't the case before. It was like really like, fine, you're working 15, 16-hour days, don't care. You're feeling sick, come in anyway. That's a major shift. You have any symptoms, stay home. You're not feeling well, stay home, because we don't know what it is. And it could be a symptom of COVID, so stay home. But yeah, the studio itself wanted to limit to 14-hour days max. And then our show is trying to keep everybody to 12-hour days. So it is a reduction. It's still long for any normal person. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, not a 9 to 5 for sure, but not the answer that I was expecting. I honestly thought that it might increase the amount of working hours, but I'm really glad to hear that there's like more mindfulness and keeping healthy and keeping, everyone, making sure everyone's feeling right and feeling good. I think that's a really healthy, positive shift. It might not have been so top of mind before across industries, not just in production, for sure. But I
think that's also so determined on your producer. So whether it's who you're working with or if you're the producer for your film, it really is top down. How much you care about it is how much everybody else is going to care about it. And so it's really important for producers to set the tone to keep everybody safe and sane.
Yeah, and actually, I just want to add, in terms of budgeting, the shorter days, that might mean adding a few more days of shooting. So can you afford that? Are you budgeting for that? That's also a consideration.
Great additions all around. And a good reminder to any producers watching the webinar to think about those things and care about your crew, It's really, really nice. Okay, so next question. Do you think the television shows with an audience will return, like a live audience? I know that I'm obsessed with the Game Show Network. So I know like Let's Make a Deal still kind of has a live audience situation going, same with Price is Right. But I would love to hear any insight you'd like to share. Me, Lisa, or Sarah, it's up to you who starts.
I was just going to say SNL is still filming with a live audience.
Yeah.
They're still doing it. It's still happening. There's more space. It's weirder. Everybody's wearing, it's not the same when people are laughing behind a mask, but there are some shows that it's just essential to. So for those shows, like you mentioned, game shows or like other live shows, yeah, it'll come back. Any big show that has an audience, they'll do what they can to make the show work.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the same conversation with theater. How are you going to keep those people, the audience members, safe? So it's the same conversation, and hopefully that's going to return in some way soon. Going to be more space, as Melissa mentioned. People are going to be wearing masks, but it's the gradual stuff that hopefully will get us back.
Yeah, that's great. Great insight. yeah, I know that, shows like Friends or anything, that you can kind of add a laugh track behind that isn't showing the live audience might be easier to kind of hide. But some shows really need that. All right, I think we have time for one more question. This one is a question from a student. As a graduating senior in high school, I am doing everything I can to prepare for my future film career. Any tips for how to jump right in and advance in the film industry with respect to COVID-19 regulations? Sarah, I feel like, you kind of did that. So we'll start with you and any tips you'd like to share.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know geographically where this person is, and I think jumping into the industry from college is different from high school, so I don't have that exact perspective. But I would say, production assistant jobs is kind of how it's the stereotypical way of how you work your way up in the film industry. So any gigs you can, find in terms of that, especially if you're interested in working with COVID compliance, there are COVID production assistants on big productions. So there's that. I recommend joining a lot of Facebook groups. There are film Facebook groups in your area for sure. I've found pretty much every film gig I've gotten from one of those. Always put yourself out there, do your research. Yeah, and I was going to say this at the end, but you're welcome to message me on LinkedIn or anything. I'm happy to continue the conversation. But know that it is possible. Don't give up. Make your own stuff if you want. Try as much as you're interested in, and try to make your resume early. It might not be the prettiest or the fullest, but that's okay. Just get as much experience as possible. And then, in a few years, you're going to have more experience than someone who's just then jumping in. So start as soon as you can.
Yeah, and I would say, especially in the beginning, like Sarah had mentioned, don't be picky about maybe what department you're working in necessarily. Just get on set, start, or even if you're, in the office, like as an office PA, and that's where your strength lies, do that. Start making connections, because that's how you'll get the next job. It's all about networking. And in that vein, just as a human, you should do this, but also as good business sense, just be nice to everybody, because you really don't know where you're going to run into that person again, or who that person knows, or, you'd be amazed at how many showrunners, I don't know, friends are a PA because they want to get in on this, and you feel like you're going to take your frustration out on that PA. That's a bad idea. You don't know who all of these people are. So just be nice, collect connections in that way, and then you'll build from there.
Great advice. And if I was going to add anything to that, I would say maybe consider becoming a COVID compliance officer. It seems like a very cool job, really important one. So, maybe that's your end. Maybe that's your next step. You never know.
Sorry, I just want to add something real quick. I mean, yeah, COVID compliance officer was one of my first jobs in this industry, and not that, and you're not put on the same level as everyone else who's been in this industry for a long time, but there's something to be said for a position that hasn't even been around for a year. So there's not really a super standard. So if you do your research, if you make connections, if you're nice to people, if you put yourself out there, there's a very good chance that you might get an opportunity to be a COVID compliance officer. And also, I wanted to mention this earlier, but there wasn't a place to. Being a COVID compliance officer, you don't have to be a specialist or a doctor or a surgeon or anything like that. It sounds logical that you'd want that, but recently there was a production I was on. I was a production assistant, and I didn't have a car, so I had to carpool with the COVID compliance officer who did have a car. And I got in the car, not only were the windows not down, the COVID compliance officer wasn't wearing a mask. And what's worse, the DP was in the car and he also wasn't wearing a mask. And I was kind of just in shock Like you're literally not even doing your job and you're not even on set. So, and he was in residency, like doing surgery. So just because you have a medical background does not mean, that's the only person who can be a COVID compliance officer. You don't need one. Don't let it stop you.
Thank you, Sarah. Oh, sorry, Melissa.
No, not at all. I was just going to say that the thing is, it's like also the person who's the medical personnel on set. If you have a set medic, they shouldn't also be your COVID compliance officer. The two things are not the same position. So you should have both on set.
All wonderful additions. I'm so glad that you found your space to mention all of those things, because really important things to keep in mind. COVID compliance is its whole new thing. And yeah, you don't need a deep understanding of medicine to understand what's gonna, keep people safe on set. So thank you all again so much for all of your questions. Hope that I got to answer a wide range of them. And thank you so much to Sarah and Melissa for being a part of this webinar. I'm gonna hand it off to Dara for some closing remarks and just like a final roundup, but I really appreciate you both. All of your knowledge is incredible. So happy that you wanted to share it with our community. So thank you.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what Nicole said. Thank you both so much. Your expertise is so valuable, and just the number of questions we've had coming in during the webinar alone shows people are engaging a lot with the content that you're giving them here. So we really appreciate that, and we really want to thank you both for joining us today and giving your time to our community. And thank you to my fellow team members here at Celtx for helping keeping things running, and Nicole for doing all those questions, Junior, Laura, Chelsea for helping us in the chat and the Q&A. Really appreciate all of you as well, as always. I think, in addition to helping us understand the industry and COVID, you both made some really good points just about life in general. And I always love hearing that. So thank you both so much for that. And on that note, we are going to clue up. So we want to thank everyone for attending today. Just as a follow-up, we will be sending everyone an email. It will have a little survey, so you can give your thoughts on what you saw today. We'll include some resources. We'll make sure you have the links for Melissa and Sarah if you want to reach out to them. And we'll have some additional insight in there. There's a great conversation going on there in the chat. It's distracting me a little about craft services too, so I might even copy some of that and throw it in the email. And the recording itself will be sent out in about a week, so we take a little time to edit it. And then you're free to share that recording with anyone, of course, as well. And the recording also always goes up on our YouTube channel and our blog, so always stay posted to those. And hopefully we will see some, if not all of you, next month at our next webinar. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
Very fun.